This is Take 5 with Bentley, Nevada. In the studio again today is Darren Evans, Global Hardware Commercial Leader for Bentley, Nevada, with a particular focus in this season on Orbit 60 as the flagship platform and being released to the market as we speak. Darren, in our last episode, we talked about this idea of a virtual backplane. We talked a little bit about the bridging modules in Orbit 60. We talked about basically the total redundancy you can have at not just the media level, but the module level. What kind of issues does this address for customers? I mean, the skeptic might say, well, cool, it's great technology. What does that mean to me as a customer?
There's a few things that come to mind when we're talking about how bridging really helps the customer. Number one is we do see a lot of cases where we deploy multiple monitoring systems on one large asset. So from a channel count standpoint, you're putting multiple systems on one of these pieces of equipment. And there are some limitations in how you connect the data together. So you have three segregated racks, let's say in this case, that maybe share speed information between one rack to the next, but all the other data is siloed. You have to have three connections back to your DCS. You have three connections up into System 1. So with Orbit 60, we can now bridge these racks together and achieve just a single backplane approach. So you have one connection to System 1, one connection to your DCS. It really does optimize the design and significant savings. The second piece was, I think if we go back to the interviews, what customers were really looking for is a way to reduce the overall investment to deploy new monitoring systems. And if you were to focus on the condition monitoring aspects of a plant with, fin fans, cooling tower banks, pump motor banks, the cost to introduce a wired system to an existing plant is very significant from a traditional field wiring perspective. But let's just say if I can mount an Orbit 60 rack in there, and I already talked about the economic benefits of as you scale one of these systems out, the price per point goes down. If I could couple that with reducing the field wiring costs of putting this system out there, you now have a very compelling argument to do a wired system to these remote assets now versus where customers may be looking at wireless technology today. Maybe they have a walk around program, but they don't want to invest in that very high end cost to do a traditional wired approach.
Well, that wire gets expensive. I mean, you start looking at, sometimes even you go around parts of a big city, you'll see chain link wire cut, and you'll see that people are going into scrap yards and scavenging copper and things like that. And I guess in the industrial world, when you're talking about pulling all these wires, so let's take and you probably know this off the top of your head, what's a typical channel count in a Bentley, Nevada monitoring rack?
It's roughly about 40 channels.
So you're talking about basically bringing back 40 individual wires just for the sensors. And then I guess you'd have more because you've typically got relays and then you've got communication cables, Ethernet and so forth. So on a 40 channel rack, you might have 50 to 60 individual wires that you're having to pull.
Absolutely. What we've found, and we did a lot of market research on this, and you can almost equate the Bentley Nevada investment, how much you would pay for, System 1, the 3500s, the services and everything else as about the equivalent to do the field wiring costs of the same product.
Okay. So take your hardware and your software and double it.
And your services and double it.
And your services and double it. Yeah. Wow.
Essentially, because what the dilemma a lot of people are facing today is if they're reduced field wiring costs, do I take my rack and move it out to the field? Or do I have maybe this more of a distributed architecture? And when you take your rack and put it out to the field, yes, you reduce your field wiring costs, but you have the same, struggles with getting the data back to System 1, getting the connection to your DCS, doing the relay wiring back to a central location. So no matter what way you do it historically, you'd always have downsides to one of those deployments. With Orbit 60, with the bridged architecture, we can keep everything back in a central location to do the connections to your DCS, System 1, your relays, and then out in the field, you're really just landing your inputs from your signals.
Okay, so really, I know it's kind of a trite statement, but you've got the best of both worlds here now. You've got a distributed architecture in terms of the I/O, and you've got a centralized architecture in terms of the processing and some of the communications and things. And I would guess that, that part of the system that's back maybe in a control room or closer to where the people are, you could put a display in that location as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to where you mount your displays and the functionality behind the displays.
Well, that's certainly a sobering kind of data point. Take all the hardware, all the services, all the software, and then double it in terms of that's what it costs to put it into service for field wiring and so forth. So, is there a name for this? I know earlier, I think maybe even in the first episode, we talked about this idea of some trademarks that were coined. And for this kind of virtual backplane distributed architecture, there were some names that you came up that involved with the letter X, if I remember.
Yeah. Yeah, and then this one was the Orbit Xtend, and the Xtend technology allows you to connect multiple systems together and to distribute them throughout your facility.
Okay, and for completeness, we talked about basically improved data integration. That also has a little trademark associated with it. And what's that one called?
Orbit Connects.
Orbit Connects. Okay, so there's the X again. And then the third one, we haven't really unpacked that one, but if I remember, that's Orbit Access. Is that the one?
That's the one, yes.
Okay, and talk just ever so briefly about what Orbit Access is all about, and then we'll unpack that one in our next episode.
Sure. Yeah. Orbit Access is all around cybersecurity. So all the things that we did at the hardware platform to really ensure a robust cybersecurity design, data isolation, we're aligning with IEC 62443 standards. There's a lot to go through on that particular feature, and look forward to talking about it.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks again, as always, Darren, for being with us. And you have been listening to Take 5 with Bentley Nevada, a Baker Hughes business.